Episode 6 of Dutton Ranch doesn't just move the story forward, it quietly shifts the entire power balance underneath everything we've seen so far. On the surface, it looks like another ranch-driven episode filled with cattle work, business negotiations, and rising tension between families trying to control the land. But underneath all of that, something much more calculated is happening in the shadows, and it all ties back to one name that barely even appears on screen after the chaos begins: RobWill. Because the most important thing Episode 6 does is not what it shows, but what it refuses to show. After Chet's death and the chaos at Ten Petal Ranch, RobWill is completely absent. No reaction, no follow-up, no visible consequences of his involvement. And that silence is not a gap in storytelling, it is the story. To understand why, we have to go back to the moment everything starts, the decision to send Chet alone. At first glance, it looks like a mistake. Chet is unstable, emotional, and clearly not trained for a controlled mission. Sending him alone into a high-risk confrontation against Joaquin at Ten Petal Ranch seems reckless, almost careless. But RobWill was never thinking in terms of traditional success or failure. He was never sending Chet to complete a clean operation. He was sending him to start something. Because in RobWill's mindset, people are not just individuals. They are tools of reaction. And Chet, in particular, was the perfect kind of unstable. He carried frustration, resentment, and a sense of being pushed aside. That emotional pressure was already building long before the mission ever began. RobWill didn't create it. He simply aimed it. And that is why Chet was sent alone. Not because RobWill didn't have options, but because he wanted isolation. No backup means no restraint. No guidance means no correction. No second voice means pure emotional output. Alone, Chet cannot be balanced. He can only react. And that reaction is exactly what RobWill needs. Because once Chet is isolated and emotionally activated, the outcome becomes predictable, in one way only. It becomes unstable, and instability is the point. So when Chet arrives at Ten Petal Ranch, there is no tactical execution, no clean approach, and no controlled engagement. Everything breaks instantly. He targets Joaquin and fires, triggering immediate chaos. And in that moment, the entire ranch shifts into emergency mode. Miguel reacts instantly and kills Chet before the situation escalates further. Rip steps in shortly after, assessing damage rather than trying to understand the emotional weight of what just happened. And just like that, the threat is gone physically, but the consequences have only just begun, because what Chet created was not just violence. He created disruption across the entire system. And that disruption is exactly what RobWill wanted. Chet's mission was never about survival. It was about ignition. And in those few moments before his death, he achieves exactly that. He forces Joaquin into panic. He forces Rip into containment mode. He forces Miguel into cleanup. And most importantly, he forces attention away from RobWill. From RobWill's perspective, that means the mission was successful. Because success was never about outcome. It was about reaction. And while everyone else is reacting to the immediate crisis, RobWill is doing something very different. He is not present in the aftermath. He is not trying to control the situation. He is not even attempting to stay connected to it. After Chet's death, he disappears completely from the visible story. But that disappearance is not retreat. It is strategy. Because RobWill does not operate inside chaos. He operates outside of it. He creates conditions, releases them into the system, and then steps back to study what people do when control is lost. And that is exactly what happens here. While Rip is handling the aftermath, moving Joaquin to McKinney for treatment, stabilizing the situation and preventing further escalation, RobWill is no longer involved in the action itself, but he is still fully engaged in something else, observation, not of events, of behavior. Because what matters to RobWill is not what happened at Ten Petal Ranch. What matters is how every single person responded to it. Who panicked? Who stayed calm? Who lied? Who protected themselves first? Who tried to hide information? Who exposed too much? Who shifted blame? Who stayed silent? These reactions are not random to him. They are data points. And once you understand how someone behaves under pressure, you no longer need to control them directly, you can predict them. That is the real game he is playing. And Chet's death becomes the clearest example of that system in motion. Because Chet was never the weapon. He was the trigger. He was the emotional ignition point placed inside a system already sensitive enough to break. RobWill didn't force him into violence in a direct sense. He guided him into it by shaping his emotional direction. Chet already felt disrespected, overlooked, and displaced. RobWill simply gave that emotion a target. And once that target is set, the reaction becomes inevitable. That is why Chet doesn't behave like a trained attacker. He behaves like an emotional explosion. He shoots Joaquin not with precision, but with anger. And that distinction matters because it shows that the violence was never strategic from Chet's side. It was reactive. And reactive people are predictable when you know how to shape their pressure points. Once Chet is killed, the situation on the surface is resolved quickly. Miguel eliminates the threat. Rip takes control. Joaquin is removed from danger and taken to McKinney for treatment. The ranch begins to stabilize again. But underneath that stability, something more important is happening. The system RobWill created is still running. Because the real outcome is not the attack itself. It is the ripple effect that follows it. Rip, in particular, shifts into full containment mode. He does not waste time trying to emotionally process what happened. He focuses on control. Joaquin has been moved out of the immediate environment and taken to McKinney, where treatment can happen without attracting outside attention. This decision is not just medical. It is strategic. Rip understands that exposure is more dangerous than injury. At the same time, Miguel quietly handles cleanup, removing physical evidence and restoring order before questions can spread. Joaquin, meanwhile, begins shaping his version of the truth, carefully adjusting what is said and what is left unsaid in order to protect himself from deeper consequences. Every character is reacting differently, but all of them are reacting under pressure. And that pressure is the environment RobWill wanted to create. Because while they are all inside the aftermath, RobWill is not. He has stepped outside of it completely. And that distance gives him something no one else in the story has: perspective. He is not inside the reaction. He is watching it form. And what he sees is more valuable than the attack itself. Because attacks are temporary. But reactions reveal structure. And structure is what can be used later. Now, the other major layer in Episode 6 connects directly to Rip and the buried body of Wes Ayers. This is where the situation becomes even more dangerous, because Rip discovers or confirms that Wes Ayers' body was buried on his ranch. At first, he doesn't react emotionally. He immediately shifts into survival thinking. A dead body on ranch land is not just a crime. It is a threat to ownership, reputation, and legal stability. But what changes everything is not just the existence of the body. It is the location. The fact that it was placed on his land turns it into a setup. Someone intentionally used his property as cover for a murder. And even if Rip does not have full proof yet, one name starts to connect in his mind: RobWill. Because the pattern is already forming. RobWill has been associated with instability, secrecy, and escalating conflict around the ranch, so the buried body doesn't feel random. It feels placed. It feels like leverage, something meant to be discovered at the worst possible moment. So instead of exposing it or letting it become a public risk, Rip takes action quietly. He removes the body from the ranch and relocates it to an abandoned mine shaft far away from any immediate investigation path. This is not just cleanup. It is damage control at the highest level. But it also has a deeper meaning. Because while Rip neutralizes the immediate threat, he also unknowingly becomes the only person who knows exactly where the body is now located. And that means the evidence is not gone. It is just hidden. Which creates a silent tension between Rip and RobWill that is not resolved, only paused. Because Rip is not just reacting to violence anymore, he is actively dismantling its consequences before they can be used against him. And that means he is unknowingly stepping into RobWill's larger game, a game built on reaction, control, and information. And that brings everything back to Chet. Because Chet's death, Rip's cleanup of Wes's body, Joaquin's survival, and RobWill's absence are all connected through one invisible thread: manipulation of consequences. RobWill doesn't need to be present in scenes to influence them. He only needs to set conditions that force others to act in predictable ways. Isolation for Chet. Pressure for Joaquin. Urgency for Rip. Confusion for everyone else. And once those conditions are in place, the system runs without him. That is why episode 6 feels calm on the surface, but dangerous underneath. Because nothing is fully resolved. Everything has only been set in motion. So when the episode ends, the real question is not what happened to Chet, or what Rip did with the body, or even what Joaquin is hiding. The real question is what RobWill now understands. Because if he can send one unstable man into a situation, let everything collapse, and walk away without ever being present in the aftermath,